Just gonna move that mouse over. Perfect. Thanks so much for having me. Great day here. We're almost there. It's been a great day, packed with interesting presentations. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is, as was just said, sort of a reflection on the Syrian refugee operation that's been taking place over the past year, really. So before I dive in, I'll just give a little bit of background about myself and my organization. So my background is actually in engineering. So I studied industrial engineering, specializing in human factors. Really, across the street here, I spent many nights staring at robots, working on problem sets, and it's sort of nostalgic to look back at it, staring at it all day. So my forte is really in user experience design and user interface design, right? So applied to lots of different types of contexts, but most recently in healthcare. So my organization, Healthcare Human Factors, we're a relatively small shop of designers, of engineers, of researchers, and we really work in the healthcare design field, right? So we do a lot of different types of work within healthcare. Some of it is in the digital side, right? So thinking about UI UX projects for chronic illnesses such as diabetes management, chronic kidney disease, chronic heart failure, providing better support tools for people who have those sorts of conditions. We also do a lot of work in patient safety, because our group is literally embedded in the University Health Network at Toronto General Hospital. So we have a great way of having access to the patients and the clinicians that we're able to design and test for. Last but not least, we do a lot of work with big medical device companies. So when you're trying to get a product into a big market like the US, you have to go through the FDA, and there's a very rigorous safety validation process that you have to go through, which is a good thing because you want to make sure that these devices are safe and easy to use. So that's just a little bit of background on who I am and my company. Let's pivot to what we're actually going to be talking about today, which is really a case study. So there's been a lot of interesting talks today on applying service design to various different perspectives, right? So what I'm going to walk through with you today is really a messy service design project. Some projects are messier than others, but this is what I would call a hairy meatball of a project. There's a lot of weirdities associated with it. Before I kind of dive into the project itself, give you a little bit of background on the actual Syrian refugee problem, right? It's a huge global issue, so I'll give you a little background on that. My organization's role in what this project was. Adapting to this specific project. That's a big part of the field of service design, is really adapting to what you need to actually tackle. The sprint itself, which is the project, I'll kind of do a visual story tell right there. And then what I would call like the fun part, the actual arrival. So meaning the arrival of the first planes of refugees here in Toronto, and they came to Pearson. And there's just a few points of reflection after that. So just a little bit of background. So this photo I like to show because it's one of my favorite photos, just sort of encapsulating the refugee experience in Canada, at least. So if you look at their faces, just like it gets me every time. Like these people are very happy, they're joyous, they've just been accepted into a new country. So they're new citizens of Canada, and you can see it, they're loving it. So how did this happen, right? So to date, there's been over 35,000 Syrian refugees that have been brought into Canada from abroad. And that's actually more than what was originally targeted by the Trudeau government back in 2015, which is, from my point of view, a good thing. But again, how did this actually happen? So I'm going to give a little bit of context on the Syrian refugees, just really a nutshell context. So it really all started with the Arab Spring uprising. So if you guys can remember this was 2010, 2011. Uprisings across the Middle East, right? So there's in Egypt, in Libya, Yemen, Tunisia, lots of different revolts to varying degrees of outcomes and success, right? I'm not going to go into the details of that, but for the purposes of what we're talking about right now, the main outcome was the Syrian civil war, which is obviously an ongoing global conflict. It's a huge issue. And it's just, as this picture gives you a sense of just complete devastation of this country. So it's really a very sad affair. And the human impact of that, we're talking about people in flux here, it's just really a mass displacement of people. So just under 5 million people, that's a lot of people who have been displaced from their homes, right? If you can imagine living in a home, living in an apartment, wherever, you are, by no fault of your own, by no choice of your own, displaced, and you have to deal with that. So lots of camps in Jordan, in Lebanon, in various countries around there, are the closest in proximity to Syria, dealing with this issue. So there's been a lot of pretty varied international responses with respect to Syrian refugee uptake, right? Very polarizing issue, right? Depending on who you talk to. So I'll just touch on a few of those perspectives from Western audiences, at least. So Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, speaking perhaps to an optimistic European point of view, if Europe fails on the question of refugees, it's not the Europe we wished for. So, an optimistic viewpoint, which is perhaps contrasted by our neighbors to the south. Donald Trump was just elected president. This is a quote from him just before he was elected, essentially saying that if he was elected, and he was, of course, that not only would they stop taking Syrian refugees, but they would literally send those who have already come to the U.S. back. So, it just very different from the other perspective we just looked at from Angela Merkel. So brings us to Trudeau, Prime Minister, heartthrob, rock star. Regardless of what you think of him, it's not the point. The point, though, is that in 2015, when he was running last summer, if you remember, bringing 25,000 refugees to Canada by year's end, and that was 2015, was a key part of his platform. Once he was elected late last year, it was like, oh wow, now we actually have to do that. So how do you actually do that? Logistically, right? Practically, safely, bring so many people across the globe. So it's a huge logistical challenge. So his perspective, is really, this isn't just about bringing 25,000 Syrian refugees. We are talking about welcoming 25,000 new Canadians. So that's the Canadian perspective that I'm sort of looking at right now. And when you think of it that way, these aren't refugees anymore. These are new citizens, right? So what is this new citizen of Canada? What's their impression going to be of our country? As they're being onboarded into Canada, essentially. This is a humongous service design problem if you think of it, right? You may not think of it that way when you see it in the news, right? Oh, refugees, but this is a humongous operational challenge. So what was our role in this? So this is a huge problem, right? A very large operation. So it's really a government-run thing. So government levels at all sorts of different levels. So federal, provincial, within Ontario and other provinces, municipal. The military had a big part of this, the Canadian Armed Forces, as well as, of course, many non-governmental organizations and volunteer groups. Really all hands on deck across the board. It's a big operation. So my perspective in this operation was through a group called EMAT. So they stand for the Emergency Medical Assistance Team. So they're a provincial group, and what I liken them to is sort of like a medical SWAT team. So if there's mass casualty incidents, like if you can imagine a mass shooting or an outbreak of something, Ebola crisis, those sorts of things, these are the medical experts who are on call to support this type of thing. Various backgrounds, doctors, physicians, nurses, psychosocial therapists, right, across the board to be able to treat any medical context that comes up really on short notice, so like basically SWAT team. So where do I come in the mix? So I'm a guy, I work on user interface design work, user experience design, but how can I possibly contribute to such a large operation, right? So that was what I was initially thinking when I was engaged to do this. But what happened really was identified that through this operation, it was made pretty clear that human factors and user experience design, service design is a big part of this. So I was identified as, okay, you're the human factors guy. Large groups of people here, but that's the role that I was asked to play. So a big part of assisting in a project like this is, again, adaptation, right? I often think of myself as a chameleon, right? So you have to adapt to lots of different types of scenarios in whatever sort of project that you're referring to. So my context was really, I was really yanked off of another project at the time. I was working on a website for prostate cancer patients just doing my thing. But this was a high-profile thing at the time. If you remember, this is about a year ago now, right? It was really in the news quite a bit, but it was high-profile, high urgency. So stop what you're doing and do this. So great, sounds good, but really classic, just thrown into the fire on this one, right? So not a lot of time to plan things out. You just have to kind of think on your feet. So what can you do in those sorts of situations? Just soak it all up. You just got to be a sponge. You just got to think on your feet and do the best you can, quite frankly. As you're doing that, though, it's really important to keep the toolbox in mind. And when I say the toolbox, I'm referring to our tactics, right? We've seen lots of examples of ethnography, co-design, experience mapping, etc. From my point of view, these are all like arrows in the quiver, right? These are different tools that can be applied to different contexts in different instances. So you just got to use your discretion to figure out what tool is best for the project that you're working through. Because what I want to emphasize here is that when I was put on this project, it was very unclear what I was supposed to be doing. You're the human factors guy, just do your thing, right? But no one, what does that mean, So there's really no clear deliverable up front. It was really to show up at this random warehouse on the West End at 6 a.m. and you'll figure it out from there. I'm showing a project brief here. I think fondly back in my agency days sometimes where you could be given a creative brief, outlining very specifically who's your target audience, what are your constraints, what are you trying to do. None of that. This is like the complete opposite of that. Very, again, hair meatball of a project, right? So as I was working through this, I was always asking myself, what is the ideal output? So I'm assisting in this operation, but what am I actually trying to create? It was really unclear, so that was something that I kept asking myself, and I'll bring that up again throughout the course of this talk. So, sorry, I'm just going to take a sip of water for a second. So that's a little bit of background. So I'm just going to jump into the sprint itself. So as you can imagine, in retrospect, everything is clear, but at the time, this was like a very intense project. So as you can imagine, it's an ever-evolving situation. Again, the feds were like, okay, we're bringing these refugees in, so just go, So a lot of pieces to this puzzle. And all the questions that you would ask as a layperson about, I wonder how they brought these refugees over to Canada, it's the same questions that we in EMATS as well as in the other organizations were asking. You would think that all the information was very clear, very outlined, not the case at all. And we're really, quite frankly, we're watching the news oftentimes to find the information, the most up-to-date information, because news, the media actually had more up-to-date information than the Canadian forces that we were dealing with. So very interesting. So really, what I'm trying to say here is that things were changing all the time, and you just got to, do everything, plan for everything, plan for the worst, and just do the best you can. So there's a whole bunch of organizations working on this. Again, this is a large problem, right? So things like identifying who the refugees are that should be, coming to Canada. Who are the best candidates to bolster Canada? So those sorts of details, figuring out where are they coming, where are they arriving, how are they going to get here, and of course, really the most important question: long-term success. How are these people going to be assimilated, integrated into Canadian society? So those are big questions, and I don't have the answer to those. But really what I'm going to do is drill down into organizationally. So EMATS, again, this medical SWAT team in Ontario, they were tasked with really providing primary care clinic support to these incoming refugees. So primary care means really just, if you go to the doctor, that's essentially just primary care. It's really the front lines of medical practitioners who are able to if you have a runny nose, they'll help you out. If you need to seek a specialist, they're the gatekeeper to those. So providing those same services in really a mobile guerrilla context, essentially, is what we were trying to do. And through the course of this sprint, it was identified that really Pearson was the primary arrival point, at least in Ontario. At Trudeau Airport in Montreal, they had the same thing going on, as well as at these interim lodging sites, these ILSs, lots of acronyms that I learned throughout the course of this sprint. And these lodging sites were really for people who, when you think of refugees, it's really those people who, when they come to Canada, they don't have a place to stay, right? Because some are privately sponsored, and actually they arrive here and they just go wherever they're going. But these interim lodging sites are supporting people who, they may have no place to stay for weeks or months on end. So they need to have access to healthcare, right? Because you need to keep in mind that these refugees, as soon as they arrive in Canada, they are Canadian citizens now, so they have every right as any other Canadian citizen, right? So my role at Healthcare Human Factors was really to connect all the dots, all these different organizations working through things and package it up for EMAT. So again, 6 a.m., show up at this warehouse on the West End, and we'll go from there. So the tactics that were involved here are things that you guys are well familiar with. Shadowing, really just listening, observing the operation that's happening, planning things out. Where are the clinic beds going to be? What are the requirements of these clinic beds, right? Mapping the flow of a clinic, right? You need to have a registration desk. You need to have a play area. You need to accommodate, religious customs, right? You need to have a prayer area. These sorts of things that you need to think about to adapt to this particular scenario. Lots of collaboration, synthesizing. You can see the news on the background where we get our information, and planning out what these primary clinics should be. So a lot of layout planning and optimization in that sense. And of course, dry running. So this is just a picture here at Pearson, where they went through essentially a dry run with all these different organizations, again, federal, provincial, et cetera, just to walk through the motions of, if you're a refugee, what's the actual experience going to be like when you land from the plane, and kind of go through the motions of being included into the Canadian context. So throughout the course of this sprint, and this is 2 weeks, so it's like nothing in time-wise. So throughout the course of this 2 weeks, it became apparent that the most useful deliverable that could take place was what we ended up calling like a guidebook document. Because for those who weren't part of the planning of this operation, they had no idea what was happening. So the idea was, again, for my role, to connect all the dots of this operation and kind of package it up. So I'm just going to show you just a few selected slides of this document. This is like a 200-page document. So just to show you, give you a sense of what some of the actual activities were. So again, as you can imagine, think of cultural sensitivity. So making sure that those who are interfacing with the refugees in a healthcare setting, know how to appropriately deal with this specific audience. So just being very sensitive to that. Looking at clinic layouts. So a big part of this was that when we were initially doing this work, we didn't know where the primary care clinics would actually be. So we had to create a generic layout that would work wherever. And once we did figure out wherever that was, we then had to sort of adapt that generic flow into those specific contexts. So lots of flows. So I'm an engineer, so this isn't the sexiest of documentation necessarily, but it's very important to make sure that you know what's up, or there's just a classic swim lane diagram, right? Who are the stakeholders at play? What are they supposed to be doing? Within any given treatment area, again, this bed again, right? So before it was really planning, and now it's sort of documenting out what is the purpose of each of these areas? What are the staffing requirements? What are the inventory requirements? Really to map these things out. And then, yeah, just the Pearson infield terminal setup. So if anybody's seen Die Hard, with the scene with Bruce Willis where he kind of lights the gas on fire and the plane blows up. So that was filmed at this location. So it's called the infield terminal. It's a mothballed terminal, so it ended up being sort of the perfect entry point for these refugees because there's just nothing there. So all these groups, so you can see, Service Canada, Public Health Canada, Security Canada, they all had little booths basically set up. And this flow, just showing the flow through Pearson. And this really is like version 12 basically, because the information was changing all the time in terms of where are they coming from, what's the flow, who are they going to see first, how are they triage if they have a medical emergency, right? All these sorts of things needed to be mapped out as much as possible so that people know what the heck is up, right? And then my favorite here, what I call the oh shit number. So when in doubt, just call this number. If you're dealing with some really weird circumstance, just call this number and we'll figure it out from there. So really, just to summarize in part, a lot of this is just rolling with the punches, right? Not all projects have a lot of time to plan things out. You just got to do the best you can within that time period. Information changing all the time, unique challenges, of course, language considerations, right? Cultural and religious considerations, very tough things to deal with. So I'm running out of time here, but I'm just going to go through a few photos here of, again, what I call the fun part, because it's really like the fruits of the labor of this whole operation. Because you do all the planning up front, and it's for the actual, intake of these refugees. So December 2015, like almost exactly a year ago now, the first flights came into Pearson. So really just trying to be welcoming of these care clinics. Refugees had to opt into healthcare, so not everybody had to go through this, but those who did need the help would have access to it, of course. So just signage, right? All these little things you need to think of. Of course, need to accommodate English as well as Arabic, and there's other languages. There's Kurdish. There's a few other languages that people were speaking that were coming here. Again, the treatment bed, third time now, planning to documentation to the actual setup. This is what the setup was like. And just the EMAT guys hanging out there. Over the course of the time, I think the first week they saw like 40-some patients. So really, this was a necessary service. And just, what makes me kind of proud to be Canadian, just the welcome of the refugees. Again, looking back to the different perspectives, not everybody believes that Canada or other countries should be taking in refugees. It doesn't matter what your opinion is, but it does matter what your opinion is, but it's what Canada is doing, and I'm proud to be a part of it. Just a couple last ones here. So this one's really a goodie bag station. So all refugees that were coming in were handed all the things that you would imagine that you would need, right? This was December 2015. People coming from the Middle East, right? So think of the climate, right? Adapting to this climate. So you need your winter gloves. You need your coats and your boots, and everybody, I believe, got a Canadian flag. So really just trying to be open to these new citizens. And again, Trudeau, really not welcoming a refugee anymore, but welcoming a new citizen of Canada, right? So all of the process flow that this new citizen has gone through is their first impression of Canada, and that was really a huge service design experience. So just a couple of points on reflection here. So just service design is a powerful lens to look at any given problem, right? Again, regardless of whether you have all the time in the world to plan out a project, I'm going to use all these tactics, this is the output that I want. You just got to work within your means and think about the toolbox that you have at your disposal. I'd also say be thankful to live in Canada. This project was an interesting one for me, and I was very proud to be a part of it. And of course, if you want to get more involved, hashtag welcome refugees. There's tons of information online. I'd encourage you to check it out. So that's about it for me. Thank you, everybody.